Ever wonder if pirates were more than just lawless thugs? What if I told you the golden age of piracy was one of the most surprisingly sophisticated, democratic, and even economically innovative systems in history? Forget the myths. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to reveal the hidden economic engine that powered the Skull and Crossbones, and how these so-called sea robbers created a system that was, in many ways, fairer than the empires they terrorized. We'll uncover everything from their startup costs and insurance policies to their surprisingly progressive HR practices. And stick around, because the way they handled their biggest expense will absolutely shock you. I've spent years digging through historical maritime records, and the truth is far more fascinating than any Hollywood movie. So, let's set the stage. We're in the early 1700s. The world is run by massive top-down empires. If you were a regular sailor in the Royal Navy or on a merchant ship, your life was brutal. You faced terrible pay that was often late or stolen, horrific working conditions, and the constant threat of a captain's tyrannical whims. It was a dead-end job with a high chance of an actual dead end. This is the world that gave birth to piracy. It wasn't just about greed. For many, it was about escape. It was a radical career change. But starting a pirate enterprise wasn't free. Think of it like a startup. Your first and biggest hurdle? Acquiring a ship. You couldn't exactly get a loan from the Bank of Nassau. Most pirate crews started by staging a mutiny, seizing the vessel they were already working on. This was the most common startup method. Others pooled their meager resources to buy a small, fast ship, like a sloop, and then worked their way up by capturing bigger and better vessels. This was their seed funding round, a high-risk investment where the payoff was total freedom. Now, once you have your ship, your company, how do you organize it? This is where pirates were revolutionary. Forget the tyrannical captain. On a pirate ship, the crew elected their captain, and they could vote him out just as easily. Power was split. The captain was in charge during battle, but day-to-day life, discipline, and crucially the distribution of treasure, was managed by the quartermaster, also elected by the crew. This created an incredible system of checks and balances, unheard of anywhere else at the time. It was a floating democracy. Everyone had a voice and a vote. Okay, so you have your ship and your democratic structure. What about your crew, your employees? This is where pirate HR was light years ahead of its time. Before they even set sail, every crew member signed what were known as the ship's articles. This was their employment contract. It laid out the rules, the punishments for breaking them, and most importantly, the exact share of the plunder each person would receive. There was no ambiguity. A typical sailor got one share. The captain, the quartermaster, the surgeon. They might get 1.5 or 2 shares. But it was all agreed upon up front. Compare that to the merchant ships where wages were a mystery and often disappeared. It's clear why so many were willing to raise the black flag. But here's something truly mind-blowing. Pirates had an insurance policy. The articles included a form of workers' compensation. If you were injured in battle, you received a lump sum payment before the rest of the treasure was divided. Losing your right arm might get you 600 pieces of 8. An eye, 100 pieces. This was a social safety net, ensuring that even if you couldn't work anymore, you weren't left destitute. The Royal Navy certainly didn't offer that. This system not only guaranteed loyalty, but also encouraged bravery in battle. You knew your crew had your back, literally and financially. So, how did this all play out in practice? Let's talk about the business model. Pirates weren't just randomly attacking ships. They were strategic. Their primary targets were merchant vessels on major trade routes, laden with goods like sugar, spices, textiles, and rum. Gold and silver were great, but everyday commodities were the bread and butter. Why? Because they were easier to sell. A chest of gold coins raises questions. A hold full of sugar is just sugar. This is where the economics get really clever. Pirates didn't operate in a vacuum. They needed a place to sell their goods, repair their ships, and spend their earnings. This created entire black market economies in places like Port Royal in Jamaica or Nassau in the Bahamas. These pirate nests were thriving free trade zones where corrupt governors and merchants were more than happy to look the other way in exchange for a piece of the action. They were the fences, the money launderers, and the supply chain for the entire pirate world. Now, I promised to tell you about their biggest expense. It wasn't cannons, or rum, or even ship repairs. Their single greatest cost was information. Knowing which ships were sailing where, what they were carrying, and how well they were defended, that was the key to success. This intelligence was worth its weight in gold. Pirates would bribe port officials, pay informants, and even capture and interrogate sailors from other ships just to get a sliver of valuable intel. A good tip could lead to a massive score, while bad information could lead to a deadly encounter with a warship. They were, in essence, running a high-stakes intelligence agency on the high seas. But let's address the elephant in the room. Weren't they just criminals? Yes, by the laws of the empires they preyed upon, they absolutely were. But many saw themselves differently. They called themselves Brethren of the Coast. They had created a society with more equality, more democracy, and more social security than the one they had left behind. You had men of all races and nationalities serving as equals on pirate ships, something unthinkable on land. The pirate code provided a structure that, while brutal, was often fairer than the civilized world. Is it possible that the system they created, born of desperation, was a radical experiment in social and economic freedom? I'll let you be the judge. Pause for a second and let me know in the comments. Based on what you've heard, was piracy more of a rebellion against an unjust system or just organized crime? I'm genuinely curious to read your take. So let's recap. We've seen that pirates were not just chaotic plunderers. They were entrepreneurs who had to acquire capital, their ships. They established a revolutionary democratic corporate structure with elected leaders. They used detailed contracts, the articles, to ensure fair pay and even provided workers' compensation for injuries. And their entire business model depended not just on force, but on a sophisticated black market, and most importantly, on gathering costly intelligence. The truth is, the skull and crossbones represented a complex economic system, a direct response to the brutal inequality of the 18th century world. The most shareable lesson here? When a system becomes too oppressive, people will always find a way to create their own, even if it means sailing under a black flag. We've demystified the economics of the golden age of piracy, and hopefully, you see that there's always more to the story than what the movies tell us. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started on uncovering the hidden truths of history. Thank you for watching, and if this video provided knowledge and entertainment, please give a like and subscribe. Thank you.